Hello, welcome to Uncommon Leadership. I'm Michael Hunter with Uncommon Teams. And today I'm talking with Antoinette Coetzee. Antoinette is a professional coach who came to coaching and leadership development through the world of agile coaching. Her pattern in life seems to be to learn something, master it, and then immediately want to share it with everyone. So she considers herself to be both a compulsive teacher and a perpetual loudmouth. Personal development, new possibilities, a more supportive society, and 3 pugs is what gets her up in the morning. Welcome, Antoinette.
Thanks, Michael.
In your journey to seeing people as people and learning to leverage their unique gifts to best accomplish your goals, what has been your biggest struggle?
So I I grew up in the world of computer science, and um, that's a very black and white world. And I don't know when I realized, probably while I was still at school, when I realized that we have unique gifts and not everybody's the same. Probably because I didn't feel the same as a whole bunch of people, um, and the same as the popular kids in a lot of instances. And it was really hard while being in the world of software development in the 80s. It was really hard to get that concept across to leaders, um, team leads, even sometimes my colleagues. I felt a bit like a crier in the desert. Um, there was a lot of emphasis on uh, what people produce, and not a lot of emphasis about what gets them in a good state to be productive and never mind happy. Happiness wasn't really on the cards back then in most of the organizations and teams that I worked in. So I could see that when people were stimulated and when they felt part of a group and safe, that they were doing really good work. But it was quite hard to get other people to notice that, especially as mostly the only female on male teams was somehow seen as being emotional, or the touchy feely stuff, or come on, just let's just we're here to do a job, just get the work done. So it was kind of sharing um, a slightly different way of looking at people and on what makes them do good work. That was tough to get across in those days, and um, also made me feel a little bit like maybe I was just a female, and maybe I was just being too emotional. So
What has most helped you navigate that environment from then through now?
so I think finding agility in the late 90s, and just that very first line in the manifesto, or the very first value in the manifesto, about individuals and interactions over processes and tools. That was that really, for the first time I felt, oh, it's not only me. It's not only me. I've noticed that men will, when they get unhappy, they will just up and go. They'll just find another job. Um, Females will sometimes say something. Um, Sometimes they'll also just up and go. But this was validation to me that we are more than just the work that we do or the skills that we bring, or um, whether we fit into a team or not naturally. But there was something really about about how people work together, and that there's an ability for a leader to create an environment where it's easier for people to lead, work together. And I think a turning point for me was around 2000 to maybe later, 2000, 2003, around there, when I was working in a group that was, it was a really bright group. I felt like an imposter. Um, and as a group, as a team, we were working really well. And the project that we were on, the company got bought over, and there were quite a few consulting companies that were vying to get the project manager of this. I mean, we were doing really successful work, the project manager across. And he refused to go without his team. So this was it was like like a bucket of cold water, to realize, oh, it's not only that that there are unique things that bring a group of people together where they complement one another, in order to become a real team. There's inherent value in having, there's an entity there almost that is more than the sum of its parts. And it is because different people bring different things, bring different skills, bring different characteristics even. They were a bunch of really bright people, so there were a lot of introverts, but not everybody was an introvert, and noticing the lightness that some people brought, the skepticism that some others brought, and how that came together in a group, to make a really robust and what we would call today high performance team was that was it felt validating, and I think it was the beginning for me as well of truly thinking about who we put together. There was a time when I called it plug and play team members, plug and play developers. We plug out, somebody leaves, well, and we need somebody with the following cold hard fact, attributes, and then we'll just plug them into the team, and tomorrow the team will just continue to produce the same as they did with the previous person. And noticing that, okay, that doesn't work. It sometimes works, but it certainly doesn't always work, and it always has an impact. So really becoming aware of how people show up in systems. In my later work, so in my coaching studies, I chose systems coaching, and just noticing, specifically relationship systems coaching, and just noticing that the same person placed into one system could look very different when placed into another system, and really becoming aware of what is it in systems that makes it work better or that doesn't make it work. And I mean, that's the quest I'm on today still, looking at what is needed, given at the same time the individuality of a person that you're bringing in, and the culture or the feel, or the spirit of the system that they are entering into. And how can we skillfully choose people for systems, and how can we skillfully allow the transformation that necessarily comes when somebody joins a system? How can we skillfully navigate that as well?
If I'm a leader who has recognized that I don't have so much skill at that, and I'd like to build that skill, how would you suggest I get started?
It's a great question, by the way. For me, it always starts with oneself. So no matter um, no matter what comes after that. But knowledge of the self and awareness of the self is always the starting point. Um, that enables you to contrast others with self as well. It enables you to develop empathy for others. And the wisdom that you get from examining the self is always, is always useful. There are beyond that, there are obviously models and evaluations and skills and competencies that can be built up. I mean, so it is useful. It's useful to know what a good team looks like. What are the characteristics of the team or the system, the division that you're wanting to create. And I know organizations who hire based on values. So if, for instance, the value is, I'm just thinking about one that I worked with earlier in the week. If the value is one of tenacity, how do I, when I interview, how do I choose people who are tenacious? What are the kinds of questions that I need to ask? So certainly bringing in values and being aware as much as one can of what is it that I'm trying to create. What is it? What's the what what's the ingredients of what I'm trying to create? Because obviously that's not the same. Based on the situation, that's not the same always. There are things like communicative competencies. When I choose people or when I look at the group that I'm leading, what's missing? If I look through the lens of communication, if I look at what I create as a leader, um, unless I create the correct environment for people, they can have everything that I'm looking for, but they're not going to bring it out. Okay, so what can I do in order to make sure that hackneyed word, that I create psychological safety? How do I make sure that every voice is heard? Um, what what do I need to learn about um, how people are under stress? What do I need to learn about neurodiversity? What do I need to learn about just how to integrate people? How do I bring somebody in? What do I know about how groups develop? Because a group that's just forming um, versus a group that's been together for quite a while, there are different things that one needs to do to keep a group engaged as they go through their lifetime. So it's a for me it's understanding how systems work. So definitely some systems thinking. The how complex adaptive systems, especially because that's what we look at when we are with human beings. It's from a personal point of view, there needs to be the willingness to make mistakes, the willingness to learn. I see a lot of young leaders, you know, when it's the first leadership position, I see a lot of young leaders assuming that they need to know what is the best for the team, that they need to have all the answers, that they need to be the protector, to almost to a kind of parent-child uh, point of view. Um, so there's an inner wisdom, inner maturity that needs to grow to understand what are the situations that I'm going to be encountering, and what do I want to do with that? What does my own leadership look like? What kind of a leader do I want to be? Um, I'm thinking about developing one's model for leadership in terms of What are the kinds of leaders that I admire? Why do I admire them? What do I think leadership is? How does it look? You know, how, if I have to bring about change um, through growth in people, how do I go about doing that? Um, what does growth look like in people? What does growth look like not only from a horizontal point of view, skills, competencies, but also from a vertical point of view? How do I develop people so that they show up um, and have inner growth in a way that would benefit not only them but also the entire system? So it's a very big subject. Uh, the the if you think about, I wonder if I Google, type in Google books on leadership, how many millions of books will I get? And it's there's so many different approaches into leadership and how to develop one's leadership as well. So, but it always starts with an understanding of the human being, and who we are and the infinite variety that we are as humans, the infinite experiences that we bring that shape us, how people react, what's good for the one person is not good for the next person. So what is universal and what's individual? So, it's a to me it's a really interesting space because there's just so much. I don't think I'll ever know enough about it. So I know that that's not a direct answer, but certainly it's hard to give a direct answer in a field that is so vast. It just starts with self. That's the only departure point that is clear to me.
So if we were to summarize everything you said into one single next step, it might be learn one new thing about yourself and one new thing about each person on your team.
Mm,
Do
mm,
that each week, and
mm,
that'll get you everywhere you need to go.
mm, mm. In addition to that, I would also say that learning doesn't have to come from you. That learning can come from asking. That's also the antidote to me about a lot of angst and and over functioning in a leader. I mean, I think I'm older than you. I grew up in a time where certainly we were still looking at hero leaders. So, like I said earlier, believing that the leader will know the answer, the leader will know where to go for us, and it just doesn't work like that anymore. The world has become so complex that no single human being can know anymore. Even if you've got a crystal ball. So really making people part of that discovery journey, making people part of that future, making people part of not only problem solving but also problem finding. We are trained to, in a specific part of our development, um, we we pride ourselves on being able to look at a situation, form an idea of what's going on, and coming up with a solution in like this, in our reactive. And that's fine and well. But in Africa, we say, if you want to go fast, go by yourself. If you want to go far, go with others. So, how do I go from my own upbringing and maybe my own experience of leadership to involve all the brains, and the hearts and the hands of those that I lead, and not overly rely on my own? At the same time as being clear, so I always think about rights and responsibilities. It's a leader's responsibility to provide vision and direction. They've got a vantage point that those that they lead not often have. So without abdicating responsibility for the things that leaders should be doing. How do I lead in a way that provides the opportunity for people to bring their best and their particular skill and their particular point of view and their particular even level of development to what's in front of us to forge a way forward.
It's important what you just said, that every person has a right to have input into the decision, and only the assigned decision maker has the right to make the decision.
So I would say it depends.
They
Okay.
may decide to delegate or extend that right to other
Yes.
people, but ultimately, just because everyone on the team has a right to input on the decision, but that doesn't automatically mean they have a right to make the decision.
Yes.
That
Yes.
always starts and ends
Yes.
with whoever the assigned decision maker is.
Yes.
And then they can choose to assign or extend that out
Yes.
to other people as
Yes.
well.
Yes. I mean, I think what's really important though is that that needs to be made clear. So I've seen, yes, through the revolution that we've had in work in terms of having a single decision maker, a command and control kind of factory model, through to more participative leadership and decision making. I've seen people go too far to the other side, where everything is a democratic decision. Okay, and not only does that take forever, but it also leaves people feeling rather rudderless. So I always think about it needs to be quite clear about which decisions are, if I use structural dynamics speak, which decisions are closed. They're taken by those in power, okay, and the execution is left to those that are not in power. Which decisions are everybody can decide for themselves, it's an individual preference, and which decisions are decided by democracy or some kind of consensus. Um, because it creates movement forward if we know that. It creates clarity. And I don't think that there's anything ever that is as hard as thinking you've got the decision, thinking that the decision is yours and working really hard to come up with the best decision, only to find out that it's not yours and that you're only supposed to be providing input to the decision. And at the same time, I read something last year sometime. I did quite a bit of work, quite a bit of research on what agile strategy looks like. Not strategy for agile, but if instead of sort of modernizing strategy to have more agility into it. And they did a study where it was somewhere in Europe. So the details escape me, but I can look it up. So somewhere in Europe, they did a study. A university did a study at an organization, and they asked middle managers. They asked them a question where they had a specific problem where either they could make €1 million or lose €1 million. And every single one of the middle managers decided that it would be a bad decision to go for it. The risk is too high. And when they asked the CEO said, you know, lose €1 million. That's nothing, because if I look at the potential of this, we could not only make €1 million, we could over the next 3 years we could make €8 million. So the what they were trying to see was, should all is it true that all decisions nowadays in participative leadership should be taken by the people who do the work? And no, the answer is no. The concerns of those that do the work versus the concerns of how a CEO looks at his organization is just very different. So there's certainly decisions that belong closer to those that are actually executing on the work or doing the work. And then there are those that need to stay with people that have a different outlook, different concerns. Look at things in maybe a longer term fashion than how are we going to make this work. So I think that's really important. That not every decision, like you said earlier, not every decision is a democratic decision, but being clear about which ones are, which ones aren't, I think is really, really important and stops a lot of churn from happening in organizations.
We're very clearly defining our scope of freedom for each person at each level. Maybe the
Yeah,
most important piece to making a company work well.
yeah, yeah. We have a heritage though of not taking complete advantage of the autonomy that we have. So I'm not sure whether it's an overhang of, um, you know, 150 years of command and control, but in my experience, a lot of people do not take full advantage of the autonomy that they have. In coaching, it's one of the questions that I love to ask because we seem to be thinking our sphere of control is really tiny when actually our sphere of control generally is a lot bigger than what we think. And outside of our sphere of control, there's still our sphere of influence. So even if you can't change it yourself, can you spend your energy on speaking to somebody who can change it? So there is also something I've always thought that this move to more autonomy and more self-organization, self-management is a bit of an egg dance. You know, leader says, "Okay, it's up to you." Okay, um, follower says, ah, I don't know quite how to do it. Oh, and if I take this decision myself, then the responsibility if it fails also comes to me. Okay, and hesitates. And the minute that decision doesn't get made, leader takes decision back. you know so there's also a process of moving from there's a growth and education process of moving from more centralized control to decentralized control. It's not an on off switch. There's steps there, and there's hand holding. It needs to be safe to fail, truly safe to fail. So,
And not only safe to fail, also expected to fail,
yep,
especially
yep,
the bigger the shift in those responsibilities or arrangements are, that we are drastically changing the way things are done here. And we
yes,
expect everyone to take some time to adjust to this. And that means
yeah,
we're all going to be working a lot less efficiently, probably
yeah,
for
yeah,
a period of time. And
yeah,
if that's okay, it's not only okay, it's what we expect.
yeah, yeah, yeah. As you say that, what it also makes me think of is it makes me think of that there's a misconception that if something needs to get done, there is a way of doing it. And um, when we shift, there might be a way of doing it currently for the current leader. When we shift, it's actually a process of learning for both leader and people who are taking it over about what it will look like in the future. So it's not like, in a lot of cases, I know how to do it, and it's something that you're going to learn how to do. And then, once you've mastered how to do it, then you can take it forward. It's not like that with a lot of the things. There are things like that are pure skill, okay? But it's not like that with most of the things that we have to make decisions on and execute on in day-to-day work. So it's a learning process for both leader and follower about what this will look like going forward if the sole decision and execution power does not sit with leader anymore, which somehow changes the dynamic for me. It really speaks into your safe to fail and will fail. We are experimenting with this. It's a new way of doing X, and who knows whether how we think that new way will work is actually how it's going to be working.
And that's one reason I love framing shifts and changes in terms of experiments, because experiments don't succeed or fail. They only give us
Yeah,
information.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
And
yeah,
information may be different results and outcomes than we expected, but it's still just
yeah,
information.
yeah,
And
yeah,
so if everything is an experiment, then that safety to fail and expectation of failure is kind of built in, because it's
yeah,
not really failure anymore. It's just we're going to do the thing and see what
yeah,
happened, and then we'll adjust
yeah,
how we do the next thing.
yeah. So interestingly enough, that mindset we only develop in later stages of our adult learning. Um, it's kind of a postmodernist mindset. So in our modernist mindset, which is what rules our expert and our achiever, um, it's either um, science or skills or a competency that will say this is right and this is wrong, and therefore no experiments required. Okay, this is how it works. Which in the achiever, it starts changing in the achiever mindset, but in the achiever, it becomes, well, I know how things work. I've been around long enough to know how things work. Okay, so that makes it hard for achiever as well to think about everything, which, like you said, everything is an experiment. I mean, when we work with people, there are no guaranteed outcomes, and that's what we do as leaders. So it's only in later stages of development that it becomes clear. Oh, yeah, everything is an experiment. I thought I knew when I did this before, this worked, but yeah, it's an experiment.
This has been a great conversation today, Antoinette. What else should I ask you?
Hmm. You can ask me about the impact that all of this growth, what's the impact that people can expect if they really engage with us?
What impact should people expect if they really engage with all of this?
So I'm going to sound like some Eastern mystic, um, but if we truly engage with this work, I mean, leadership development is personal development. If we truly engage with this work, what tends to stay behind is more and more of the ego. Um, we've spoken about experimentation. Experimentation says, I don't know what the outcome is. I don't know what the answer is. I also don't know what the outcome is of this action. So that brings with it a humility that's hard. If we think about how we grow, generally that means the stage that we've been working on since we're about 6 years old. We start working on our developing expertise, knowledge, competency in knowing, whatever that knowing for us is, whether it's our craft or life, or we have to give it up. And if we take our pride in our knowing, in our mastery, it is very, very hard to give it up. That's what happens when we move from expert to achiever, when we move from achiever to next stage individualist. We have to give up that we know how things work, that we know what the best way is. Because in our individualist, we discover there are so many ways and there are so many lenses to look at the world. There are so many different approaches, so many definitions of what good looks like, all of that. So, probably the hardest thing is that if we want to move forward, we need to give up that which we value most.
Very profound and exciting all at the same time. Thank you. The This is a perfect lead into the gift you have for our audience, because that will help
Mhm.
them stay sane while they are feeling scared, profound, and excited on this journey. Tell us about that, please.
So, I was asked during the pandemic, I mean, we spoke so much in the pandemic about um, how to keep going, how to, as coaches, how to work with people to help them to keep going. It was such a hard time, and it really forced me to go back to basics. Some people started baking sourdough breads and, pick up knitting. And then there were some of us who worked harder than we had ever worked before. And in the work that, coaches and leaders do, there was a real danger that we would stop looking after ourselves. So it was for me very much back to basics. What can I do when what do I remind myself of will replenish me when you can't go anywhere, you are stuck at home, you can't see anybody except through Zoom, which you hated after a while. Um, so it really is an attempt just to bring together, it's a combination of a couple of things, a couple of tools and techniques that I have in my own toolbox that is really useful to provide space in our heads to deal with whatever whatever is happening around us. So, and it's a combination of somatics, a little bit of mindfulness. So very simple, very easy. Don't need any equipment. Don't need a change of clothes. So
Lovely. Thank you. What's the best way for our audience to connect with you? They'd like to learn more about those practices and everything else we've talked about today.
So it's easy to find me on LinkedIn. My surname is a bit of a mission. My Antoinette is a proper Antoinette, like the silly French queen. But my surname, when you are living outside of South Africa, where it's a reasonably common surname, it's in the US and in the UK, it's just Coetzee. So it's easy to find me on LinkedIn, or you can also go to my website, which is agilecoaching.global. And you can reach me there.
I'll have both those links in the show notes.
Thank you.
What would you like to leave our audience with today?
So if you can look at the place that you are and relish in the place that you are, no matter where it is, That is the best place to start growing from. So, really inhabit wherever you are right now, because that will give you the energy, the clarity, the direction that you need to move in.
Lovely again. Thank you.
My
Thank
pleasure.
you for being with us today, Antoinette. And thank you, audience, for joining us as well. And please let Antoinette and I know, what do you resonate with from what we talked about today? What doesn't make sense or maybe does not resonate with you? We'd love to hear from you. Thanks and have a great
Thank
day.
you, Michael. You too.
Thanks for joining us on Uncommon Leadership today. If you found these stories interesting, inspiring, and illuminating, sign up for my newsletter. Hop over to uncommonteams.com and use the form at the top of every page. You'll be the first to know about every new episode of Uncommon Leadership. You'll also discover how you can build uncommon teams. If you'd like to chat about doing that yourself, email me, michael@uncommonteams.com, or use the contact form on my website. Thanks so much.